people co-host.
Okay, recording na.
Okay, the docs.
Good afternoon po to those who are already in the room. Welcome.
Good afternoon. Okay, admitting. Hello, Carlo EY.
Let me know when you're ready.
Francis. Yeah, actually we can shall I live na?
Francis, you good?
Francis.
I'm good, thank you.
All right, Doc Homer, you good?
Good.
Okay, Doc Iggy, you good?
Doc Iggy, wait, let me co-host you. There you
Okay.
go.
I'm okay.
Okay, Sir
There
Noy,
you
you
go,
good?
Doc Iggy.
Hi, Corey. Sir Noy, we good?
I'm okay.
I love the headphones, by the way. Let's go, Ellie.
Okay.
I'll get a notice, right?
All right.
No, I won't get a notice. That's right. Just let me know. Si Doc Jody naka-mask pa, oh.
Oo nga.
Baka mag-viral kasi yung cuddle, yung ating press con. Eh.
Oo nga. Mars, hang in there.
Yep.
Just getting the restream.
Yep. Good afternoon po, everyone, and welcome. We're just doing away with some last-minute technicals.
Yeah.
All right.
Just give me a minute.
The 208 in the room already.
Yes.
Doc
Please.
Iggy, we're good with Sir George, no?
Yeah. Okay. But he will be available 2 o'clock.
2 o'clock. Yeah, we're starting late anyway, so okay lang siguro.
2 o'clock pa. Okay. Just give me a sec. I'm getting the streaming configuration. Usually it works immediately, but not today. That happens. Okay. Mars, baka you can greet people.
Yeah. Okay. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. We will be starting shortly. We're just dealing with some, what do you call them? Technical issues.
Yeah. There you are. Right. Okay. We're good to go. Yes.
All right. Good afternoon once again, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Concerned Doctors and Citizens of the Philippines press conference titled, Is Government's COVID Response Doing More Harm Than Good? We hope to answer that question for you during the rest of this session. To welcome us with his remarks is our Concerned Doctors and Citizens of the Philippines President, Dr. Homer Lim. Dr. Homer?
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. So it was March of 2020 when the government first told us we would need at least 2 weeks to flatten the curve. It's now almost 2 years, and we're not doing much better, and we're actually doing much worse than most of other countries around the world. We say it is time to take our lives back and our livelihood from the iron grip of the Department of Health and the IATF. It is time to stop doing what we all know isn't really working, despite the threats, both direct and indirect, against our group, despite the vindictive actions by those who want to keep us quiet and just follow all their directives, ordinances. Our group not only remains strong, but we have actually grown in number, increased our voices into a clamor, and deepened our faith in God that at the end of all their ignoble actions, rational and compassionate actions will prevail. Quoting the words of Professor Richard Enos of the Edinburgh University, if you're in the government in charge of health policy, the most important thing you need to look at whether you are having a positive or an adverse effect on people's health. One of the best ways of measuring that is actually how many excess deaths, if there are. Are there more excess deaths this year compared to last year and the year before that? What's the average number of deaths, more or less, right? So it is by examining these very figures that the concerned doctors and citizens of the Philippines seeks to bring our people some answers. What kind of report card do we give the Department of Health and the ITF? So are there more Filipinos dying today than in 2019, 2020, and 2021? So today we are asking a very simple question. Is the government's COVID response doing more harm than good? Mga minamahal na kababayan, bagamat marami sa ating kapwa Pilipino, hindi naiintindihan ang kabuuang implikasyon ng mga ginagawa ng iilang nagmamarunong at nagsisinungaling. Huwag po tayong madismaya o matakot. Sa halip, magbigay tayo ng pasensya at pag-unawa. At kung may pagkakataon, ipahiwatig natin ang ating nalalaman at panalangin natin naway bumukas ang kanilang isipan at damdamin sa ating hangarin na bumuti ang buhay ng bawat Pilipino. Ang CDC Ph po ay nangangakong di magsasawa o matatakot na iparating ang tamang impormasyon sa bawat Pilipino kahit saan po sa mundo. Okay? So with that, we'd like to call on our CDC Ph founding member and also our business world economist, Mr. Bienvenido Oplas, to talk about the economic report recently released by the Philippine Statistics Authority.
Sir Nonoy,
Hi,
go ahead,
good,
please.
good afternoon. Thank you, President Homer. That I already sent my. Should I?
I have.
Yes, yeah.
I have it po. Would you like me to share it?
Yes, please.
Okay, Ellie na lang. I prepared a 7-slide presentation which I can deliver in just about 5 minutes. Okay, so readers just focus on the numbers, and I will speak rather fast. Okay, so the question is government's COVID response doing more harm than good? My direct answer is yes. Lockdown and heavy vax pushing has caused economic stagnation and industrialization. I present here 8 quantitative proofs.
Next slide.
Oh.
Thank you.
Okay, reason number 1, or proof number 1. Lockdown was imposed in March 2022, or after 5 weeks. This column was already argued to end the lockdown, no more extension. Why? Because as early as April, there were huge business losses and huge borrowings already. The budget approved for 2020 was 4.1, and the DOF wanted 1.4 trillion of borrowing to top the 4.1. And Congressman said the 1.65 trillion because they saw the damage. Reason number 2, by June 2020, or 2.5 months from the lockdown, the column called IATF, interagency to terminate functional businesses. Why? Because there was huge job losses. The unemployment rate jumped from 5.3% in January to 17.7% in the April 2020. And reason number 3, by end 2020, the Philippines has the worst performing economy in Asia, the worst, of minus 9.6% GDP contraction, and also minus 13.6 industrial production. Next.
Next slide, please.
Reason number 4, by first half or H1 of 2021, last year, there was GDP growth through because it came from a very low base. But if you look at GDP level on the first half 2021, it was only 8.89 trillion pesos. This was even lower than the first half 2018 level of 8.94 trillion pesos. So tumataas ang growth, ang percentage, but yung value, walang pinagtaas. Reason number 5, by November 2021 data as released by the Philippine Statistics Authority, The population trend has started since mass vaccination started in March. One, excess death from March to September was almost 184,000 over March to September 2020. And there were less births of 146,500 from March to September 2021 over the same period. Next. Reason number 6. By end 2021, meaning the GDP fourth quarter that was released last week, the GDP growth for over 2021, 2020 was 5.6%. But if you look at the actual data, there were nearly 3 years of economic stagnation. The GDP size in 2021 was only 18.5 trillion pesos, way below the 29 level of 19.5 trillion pesos, but a bit higher than 2018. So 3 years backward, economic backwardness. There was also the industrialization. The volume of investment and capital formation has declined by nearly 1 trillion pesos from 2018 to 2021. And the industry sector has decreased or shrunk by 50 billion pesos. That's the extent of the industrialization. Next. So number 7, there were heavy borrowings. So because you have heavy decline in revenue, so after heavy business losses. The average borrowing, the last 2 years of the previous administration was 224 billion pesos per month. In the first 3 years of the 30 administration, 7 billion pesos per month. In the last 2 years, the government is borrowing 208 billion pesos per month. Ganun kalaki. What does it mean? Next. Next. The 208 billion pesos per month borrowings hindi per year per month is equivalent to the full year gross revenue of some huge companies in this country. BPI, 105 billion, Smart Telecom, 103 billion. So yung gross revenue nila in one full year, this giant corporate is just equivalent to 1 month borrowing of the Philippine government. Or Globe Telecom plus Weleg, ganun yung kalaki. And so that's how big the borrowing per month. The total increase in outstanding public debt as government to spend, borrow was 2 trillion pesos per a year in the last 2 years. The 2 trillion increase in outstanding debt in 1 year is equivalent to the total gross revenue of the 14 largest corporations in this country in 2020. Ayan, Meralco, BDO, Petron, Philip Mercury, Shell, Nestle Group. Pag sama-samahin mo yung kanilang gross revenue, ganon yung kalaki yung sa inutang ng government in 1 year. Yeah. Next. Next. So, this is my last slide. So, what if the IATF did not do the following? Did not do 2 years of lockdown, did not do prohibitions of area treatment, did not do disbelief or demonization of natural immunity, and did not do implicit mandatory vaccination via box discrimination and segregation. And instead, what if the IATF allowed? 1, allowed full mobility of young and healthy people, allowed prophylaxis for elderly and comorbidities, allowed recognition of natural immunity, there's no need for mass vaccination, and allowed voluntary vaccination for those who believe, and no coercion for those hesitant. If the IATF made this policy, instead, I am thinking that the economic performance of GDP growth in the Philippines may likely be along Taiwan and Vietnam. They have growth, South Korea, Indonesia, we have slight contraction compared to the Philippines minus 9.6%. And vax procurement and vax and borrowing could be lower. Vax spending in 2021, national government alone was 82.5 billion pesos, excluding the vax spending of LGUs and corporations. And for this year, the vax spending was 48.2 billion pesos, again excluding vax procurement. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Bienvenido Oplas, Business World columnist and economist. For our media colleagues, there will be a question and answer portion which will be handled by Dean Bernales, our associate. So please hold your questions, or you can send your questions in now to Dean via the chat. He's Name in the chat is Dean, Dean, Delta Echo Alpha November. So you can send your questions now to Dean via the chat. To follow, Sir Nonoy Oplas is orthopedic surgeon, Dr. Benigno Agbayani. Doc Iggy, go ahead, please.
Hi, everyone. 267 wonderful fans of the CDC Ph. I'm glad to do this talk. I think a very timely and crucial talk. So let me just begin with sharing my slides. Okay. Okay. Is it? So the title of my presentation is The Massive Excess Deaths in March to September of 2021. I think it is the deadliest health disaster in the history of peacetime Philippines. We follow the science, the real science, and not the big pharma-driven profit-oriented science. As most of us would know, the first official dose of vaccination was on March 1, and that is my good friend, Dr. Gov't, PGH director. This is March 1, 2021. But we all know that there were other vaccinations which started even as early as December of 2020, but of course unofficial. One of the first ones to come out with this information of massive excess, that was our good friend, Mr. Bienvenido Oplas. We just heard him a few minutes ago. There's an addition to this one. There was an additional, I think, 70,000 plus today. And these are his, the last one I recorded was, you can see the change between 2021 to 2020. These are big numbers if you think about the whole total number of deaths per year. Okay. And then on January 15, during our huddle, we asked one of our friends, Super Sally, to show her interpretation of the data. And an unusually quick response by the Population Commission, wanting to debunk the excess death due to vaccines, because that is our theory. They said that the increase was from the 88,000 deaths when Philippines started vaccine rollout versus previous years. But I would like to correct that. It's not 88,000 deaths only. And of course, they would use their ad hominem response instead of challenging with us with correct data. They started calling us conspiracy theorists, that we are anti-vaccine, and that we are depopulation theorists. No, so sometimes it's not wrong, of course, to be a conspiracy theorist if you can back it up. No, so it's like trash talking, but if you can back it up, you're the best trash talker. Again, on January 25, Dr. Rafael Castillo, one of our important members of CDC Ph, also came out with an article with this flash 450,000 excess deaths. This is not the actual number, but it's the predicted number, because as most of you know, the data that we have was only until September, and the National Statistics Authority has not yet shown us the last 3 months of 2021. This is one of the graphs that would be very interesting to see. This is the cumulative number of deaths from all causes compared to the projection on previous years. So it is likely similar to the excess mortality, and though it doesn't show before 2020, but you can see that in the year 2020, we even had a negative excess mortality. And I will try to show that later. Here is some of those more defined data. This is the black one is the projected 2019 to 2015. That is the average. So this violet line is the raw numbers of deaths. You can see the difference starting around March. It was gradually increasing, and this is sort of like around 50,000 is like your average number of deaths annually. So if you can see that growing from 50,000, it becomes 70,000, then 80,000, then 90,000. So imagine that in September, we had about an excess death of almost 50,000. And it could be even more. So something is causing the sudden deaths of thousands of Filipinos starting in March 2021. And from March to September 2021, we have recorded about 180,000 excess deaths. Maybe the deadliest 7-month on record in the Philippines starting a year after COVID-19 started. Now, the total of COVID documented deaths from COVID-19 from March to September, the same period that we had an excess death, was only 38,294. So that's a big leap. Where did the excess, that's about 140,000 come from, if it's not from directly from COVID? So this is the graph that we borrowed from our friend Super Sally. Here's the link if you want to see, but you can actually get this data separately. But in this graph, she was able to put it all together. Thank you to our friend Super Sally. As you can see on this side is the excess deaths. So it reached up to 180,000 from the last time that we were able to measure it. And then this is the, in millions, the doses of vaccines, cumulative vaccines, that has been given since then. And you can see the very similar pattern of increase. No? Okay. Now, when I was doing my search at the the Philippine Statistics Authority website, I came across this slide presentation, and you can also watch it. Just link. There's the link up there. This was written by some statisticians and a doctor of I think he is has a PhD in statistics, Dr. Michael Dominic Del Mundo. Both of them are employed by the Philippine Statistics Authority. And they wrote this paper back in August 21. That's my best guess because of the data that they had. So I'd like to share it with you. So this was their introduction. And in August, this was the numbers that they had. That the DOH reported 33,000 COVID deaths. However, the number does not entirely reflect the pandemic mortality in the country. And I agree with them. COVID deaths alone do not reflect it. We at CDC Ph believe that the lockdowns, the barriers that we have created has caused a significant number of collateral damage and of course deaths. So they were trying to investigate why there was excess deaths. So this is a very nice graph. You can see from 2015 to 2019, that's in the gray, and how they progress every month in the past. So it hardly moved much, until the orange and the blue, that's the 2020 and 2021. You can see the difference by month. And they had to stop at this point because I think they had not, this was made back in August. So wala pa silang data from June, no? But there was already a trend. In other words, they already had some idea that something was happening. And I think it is the job of the Philippine Statistics Authority to give a warning even at that time. Now, they also showed this slide, this picture, showing the difference between the year 2020 and up to February of 2021. So basically, it compared cost of deaths between those two periods and in 2021, but up to a certain point only. You can see here that this is the old ranking, this is the new ranking. Pneumonia, diabetes mellitus rather, overtook pneumonia because before diabetes was number 5. And this is not unexpected, having have to stay home, maybe ordering food, eating more processed foods and carbohydrates. This is not actually unexpected. And here you can see that in 2020, COVID virus, although not identified, was already predicted as one of the top reasons for COVID deaths. Though in 2020, it was 19,758 only. Okay. So that's a more graphic presentation of the ranking. This is comparing 2019 to 2020. And you can see here that there's a big group of other causes of deaths. So that's, of course, a bit puzzling. Maybe it's a reflection of the patients that were not even brought to hospital, that died at home, and were not many people are able to determine the cause of death. But the problem is this was again only up to 2020 when our testing was not yet very high. Now I want you to look at this graph. It's a very interesting graph because it's hard actually to get data by age group. This is like a very special graph. I was so excited when I saw this graph. Look at here from January 2020 until January 2021. Look at the deviation from expected deaths. It looks like those between 1 to 4 had even increased their expected deaths. I mean, they were not dying. In fact, negative 75 to 50. Yung younger groups up to 9 years old, nahalata natin. Although there was a gradual decrease in this number, no. Perhaps the first few months was like a bonanza for avoiding deaths in this very young population. However, here you can see that this is about the start of the vaccination. And even though in the younger group, there was still a small number of changes, still negative, there was a big increase among the elderly. So up to 50, you can see that red spot, and way up to the age of 74. So there's something that we're killing the people above 50 to 70. So I would surmise that the majority of those who died in this period, which is about March to May that they had, was in this major group. And now you have to ask whether is it because of COVID or something else, or heart diseases, diabetes, or vaccination. I would also point out that even if COVID-19 has been around since 2020, it had no effect on children, especially those below 9, and I think even up to 14 years old. Look at that. Hardly no effect. There's something happening already in 2021, but still, nagde-negative pa rin sila from expected deaths. So would you still want something done in that age group? Now, there was a response by the Population Commission Executive Director, Juan Antonio Perez. I think he's a career statistician. He's been with the Population Commission for quite some time. I have not really talked to him yet, but here are some of his comments regarding the excess deaths. So diseases were pushed deaths higher. It was COVID-19 starting in 2020 when vaccines were not yet available. So that is his claim. So how could it have caused the disease? Well, I think he forgot that our claim was it started in 2021, not in 2020. COVID did not push excess deaths in 2020. Okay. In fact, we had a negative excess deaths in the year 2020. So this is like an unfounded statement. Next is the increase in deaths compared to previous years has been noted since July of 2020, comparing the first 6 months of 2021 to the same period of 2020. Now, the way he got the data was he was collecting in a strange way. He just picked July and then took the first 6 months and then got a number from that, and he got 88,191 deaths. So I had to correct that. I think there's a wrong determination of the period of excess death. He should have taken from March to September, where he would have gotten a number much bigger than this. It would be 180,000 deaths, not 88. So that's an enormous number that he will have to explain. One can attribute over half of that, or 51% according to Perez, to COVID-19, and the rest to ischemic heart disease, hypertensive disease, or other illnesses. Now, when you see those diagnoses, you might say, yes, they have died from ischemic heart disease. But of course, these are also the side effects of vaccination, of lack of care for patients unable to see doctors. There are other reasons for that. You do not stop there and say, oh, it's not vaccine, it's ischemic heart disease. These are some of the common causes. And as you know, strokes, vasculitis are also part of the side effects of vaccines. Here's again another statement. We noted a decrease in attendance in health centers, clinics caused by the hesitancy of some patients. That is true. However, the negative excess mortality was up to more than 1 year, even when COVID-19 was already around. So it does not really explain why there was a positive excess mortality in 2021. Now, as for vaccine, Perez said that these vials are products of scientific research and are generally safe and are designed to protect life. Okay, now you might say generally safe. I think even he has hesitated in saying it's safe because incomplete vaccine research are still experimental and have unproven safety, especially the long-term safety. The only reason that we are using it is because it's under emergency use authorization. There is no proof whatsoever that we can say these vaccines are already safe. That's the reason nga po. It's still an experiment. It is under emergency use authorization. And finally, vaccines are products of scientific and medical endeavor, primarily designed to protect and uphold life and not cause it harm. Creating them for a purpose other than the good of mankind as alleged would be unthinkable and utterly inhumane. And I agree. And if they have done something, then they would be inhumane and something unthinkable just happened. So this is another beautiful graph. Excess deaths has a much steeper curve and for different timing of increase versus the COVID-19 death or effect. You can see that the progression of COVID deaths was a slow increase, which started already way back in August 2020. While this is the excess deaths progression, it was negative practically the whole of 2020. Then suddenly, around March, it started to increase exponentially. This is the estimated cumulative excess deaths. And this came from a very reliable source. I think you can all visit the site. And this is their estimated numbers because our statisticians have sent them the data, but it is incomplete. It did not finish until December 31. So they made an estimation. So expected cumulative deaths during COVID-19, if but we use the upper bound, would be around 300,000 plus. But of course, since we came from a negative, that would be even more. So this is like a following the track of a typhoon. It looks like this may look like more accurate than this one, and this one is really being optimistic. So as far as we're concerned, this is the data that we have, only 180,000. But if we collect the last 3 months, it could be 300,000, could be 250,000, could be 200,000. Still massive numbers. So again, this is the exponential or accelerating rise weekly of excess deaths. Something is adding up quickly, unlike a seasonal virus. No, it is not. A seasonal virus goes up, goes down, then goes up again, goes down. So that is a behavior, and then of course we adapt to it. We open up businesses, so we should expect that if that were the cause, we would have something like a surge and in a low point. But this is not happening from the excess death mortality data. Now, I'd like to compare some countries, our neighbors, with our cumulative excess deaths. And you can see here, the Philippines is one of those countries that really experienced excess deaths only starting in 2021. Indonesia had been gradually increasing their numbers, even as far back as April 2020. India, likewise, similar to Philippines, but it had a spike around June 4 or July. That might be worth investigating also in India. Although I do know that they have been vaccinating a little earlier than the Philippines, but because of their large population, it may not necessarily show here, no. But Thailand, the same thing. Thailand also experienced the same difference in cumulative excess deaths sometime only this year, while in 2020 not. So there might be something affecting our neighbors as we do. Now, this would have been a very good graph had we have the data. As you can see, this is the excess mortality by age group. I chose Malaysia and the Philippines because I wanted to know if this was available or not. Apparently, it's not. We only have data for all ages, not for all the age groups. But that's why I found that graph earlier showing the data of age groups. Very significant. But here you can see it in the US that their excess mortality in the young hardly goes past 0. And then at 15, there is some kind of increase. No? The same way with 65 and 74. No? But this is in percentage by age. No? So there could be other factors involved. Okay, but again, 0 to 14, should you vaccinate anyone below 14? You can decide based on the graphs shown in the US. How I wish we have data here in the Philippines. Now, I came across a very prestigious professor. He's Professor Richard Enos of the University of Edinburgh. And he was saying the same thing as what we have been observing here, but he's mentioning it with regards to Scotland. And you can watch that show, that interview here on the link. He is obviously a very prominent professor, and he's following the same theory that it is the vaccines that is causing the excess deaths. And he believes it's the mRNA vaccine more than any other vaccine. Please go and visit that site. So this is the article written by Dr. Castillo, and I will quote some of the things he wrote, which I think is very important. This was in January 25, published in the Inquirer. He's a columnist there. So he said, no such magnitude of deaths was noted in the whole of 2020. And in January to February 2021, when we already grappling with several COVID variants and surges, but no vaccinations yet. No, so there was no magnitudes of death, no no vaccines, and even the start of some variants. And our health officials should investigate thoroughly to determine what might have caused the excess deaths of 180,000 Filipinos from March to September 2021. So based on that government data alone, it looks like for every excess death, there were 250 vaccine shots. No, but that is, of course, sort of an extrapolation of the data. We still have to prove that vaccines is really the one that's causing the deaths. There is no data yet for the last quarter of 2021. But if the correlation of excess deaths with number of mass vaccination is maintained and considered the ramp up vaccination campaigns in the last quarter, it is predicted to maybe up to 400,000 deaths of excess. And I agree with this observation. So again, I'm going back to the talk that this is the link to that published PowerPoint presentation from the PSA. These are some of the slides that they have there. Following the latest WHO guidelines, they actually had a division between how to diagnose COVID deaths. So here you can see that virus identified, U07.1, and virus not identified. And because there are, of course, some deaths that could not be tested, or in some places maybe we had lack of testing centers or the ability to the patient to visit the hospital. So there's a two classification, but based on these are not bad reasons to diagnose COVID, by the way. So it's not necessarily every time that you have to measure by RT-PCR or even antigen tests. So remember that 7.2 without tests, 0.1 is with tests. And this is the graph that they showed until May 2021, COVID-19 related deaths. No? So more or less what we see is the blue line, but they believe that because of the yellow part, which is the untested part, or 0.2, it could be much higher. But however, if you look at the numbers, it's really not much higher. Kasi nga, remember, our total of documented deaths is only 50,000 since 2020. So if that is the number here, and this is the expected number there, or total, if you look at the space here, that's how to calculate more or less the total. It would be around double the numbers. So even if we double the numbers of COVID-19, and that was around up to what data we have with September, it would only be around 60 or 70,000 deaths that could be attributed to COVID deaths, both tested and untested. So still does not cover 180,000 excess deaths. So in addition, other causes attributable to our pandemic, they did mention the incorrectly diagnosed and reported, and also deaths from other causes attributable to COVID-19. The estimation of excess deaths is more comprehensive measure of total impact of the pandemic on mortality. So that's why we are now showing you the excess deaths, because it is more comprehensive. It may show us that the things that we've been doing, like lockdowns, being very unselective of people who we stop from going out, may be causing deaths, keeping you in your homes, etc. Now, this is very interesting again. This came from the same paper from the PSA. Look at these numbers. This is vaccines or COVID-related deaths. And you will see the regions where they are mostly starting to show. So weekly deaths from expected deaths by region, you can see that it mostly started in Luzon. So there it is. So in March, something was happening in Luzon. But already some few were already being detected in other regions. So there was really something about March. And why was it still located in Luzon mostly? However, this one is from our medyo, yung data there may not be as reliable. Okay, now PSA, or the Philippine Statistics Authority, had projected last June I think August pala, to 2021, an excess death of 229,000 for 2021. Imagine that as early as around that time, they already projected a 229,000 excess deaths for 2021. And here it is, This was the numbers back in 2020 between males and females, total of only 26,000 estimated excess deaths. In 2021, this is a projection, but you can also see the difference. More females was projected to die. And while as in 2020, more males actually died. In 2022, you'll still expect more females to die. And this is their prediction in 2020. But I'll show you how they tried to predict it. I think they're wrong. Here is what is their, they showed this graph. And I think they're using this red line as a potential guide. And as you can see, they only had it until week 22 or June. And they have not seen the actual rise until September. So it looks like it will follow the high end rather than the low end. Okay. Same thing with the males. It's even lower. There was a slight dip. So I think that's why they justified making the slope a little lower. But if they have seen the data until September, it will be very high. So I think their predictions are still conservative despite the high numbers. Now, testing capacity could not be blamed because as early as August 2020, we already had a fairly adequate testing capacity. This is our numbers of testing back in August 2020. And I think we were quite well into testing around April of 2021. And that is sort of our true capacity. And COVID-19 confirmed deaths did not correlate well with excess all-cause mortality. So this is like the numbers of COVID deaths by time. So you should wonder why even in this time there was no excess deaths, even for that month alone, if we are to blame only COVID-19. Something really went wrong by March. When we started vaccinating, we had increased numbers of cases and deaths related to COVID-19 and even excess deaths. There was something really happening then. So in summary, these are my last 3 slides. So estimated 180,000 all-cause excess deaths in 7 months from March to September 21. October to January, not yet available on our official public sites. It is predicted that there are about 230,000 excess deaths if until January. However, our own prediction from CDC Ph is around nearly 400,000 deaths. There is a correlation, but still unproven causation between excess deaths and vaccination rollout in the Philippines. From March 2021, you should begin your counting there because that is really the most crucial time when we notice the difference. So the pattern of accumulation and temporal relation of both vaccination and excess deaths cannot be denied. But again, I must say it is a correlation. Epidemiological studies are a way of determining what we should be investigating as soon as possible. They do not really make conclusions. The excess deaths of rapid change of 2021 is unprecedented in the history of peacetime Philippines. That's a fact. Pattern of both documented and undocumented COVID deaths do not correlate with the excess deaths surge patterns. The excess deaths of 2021 did not affect the children and the young adults below 30 years of age as much as the 40 years old and above. Okay, so until May of 2021. Experts from the Philippine NSA, UNFPA, or United Nations Population Fund made these estimates of excess deaths. Well, for the year 2021, this is their estimate. And I think because they measured the one until June, they have grossly underestimated it. But even then, there was a massive difference of 202,000. There is a similarity of excess death statistics on some other countries in the region. So what do we need to do as soon as possible? Number one, we have to stop all vaccinations immediately until a more thorough data collection and independent analysis can prove beyond doubt these experimental vaccines are safe. Stop the bleeding from the most obvious and more controllable source. We cannot yet stop COVID-19, but we can stop something that we have introduced back in March 2020, 2021 rather. So we need to complete our data as soon as possible, access these numbers, including age groups and cause of deaths. Data collection to determine the status of the vaccination of all reported deaths. We want to know how many of those who died were vaccinated or not, even a single dose or full dose. So including those within 2 weeks of vaccination, because there's been a report that people who were not yet past 2 weeks were not counted as vaccinated. So this must be included within the 2 weeks of vaccination. We must have transparent scientific discussion to include independent experts and exclude advisors or experts with conflict of interest. And last, we check quality and consistency of vaccine batches, if this is still possible. That could account for the differences in country to country experience. Because I will always hear someone say, how come it's not happening in this country or that country? We must concentrate on what's happening in the Philippines. And maybe it's because of the different kinds of vaccines that we receive, and maybe a difference in the type of batch that we've been getting. So thank you from the concerned doctors and citizens of the Philippines. We are not conspiracy theories and we are not anti-vaccine. We follow the real science and not big pharma-driven profit-oriented science.
Thank you very much, Doc Iggy. Just a few notes, ladies and gentlemen, for those of you who are just joining us, to our media colleagues, you can send your questions via the chat to Dean Bernales. You can look for him in the chat. He's listed as Dean, Delta Echo Alpha November. Dean, Delta Echo Alpha November. There'll be a slight change as well, Dean, in our format, in our program. We will have the Q&A after Francis Abraham issues the call to action. Now we will turn over the floor to Dr. Homer Lim to discuss early treatment options. Dr. Homer?
Yes. Thank you again. So as what we have been discussing since September of 2020, we have been offering the early treatment options for COVID. And some of these drugs would include, of course, your hydroxychloroquine, your ivermectin. We also have recently, I'm sure a lot of doctors and patients now have access, although it's limited, it's the Regeneron or Ronapreve here in the Philippines. That's also part of the early treatment options. Okay, now a lot of people are also interested and actually have tried using the newer antivirals such as the molnupiravir. I think there are places also where in Paxlovid is
Hi,
also
Doc.
covered.
We can't
However,
hear you clearly.
Closer na lang, Doc, the microphone.
okay.
Yeah. Let's try it again.
So yeah, so
Yeah.
this
Okay.
so the early treatment options that we have for COVID has been shown to be very, very effective and actually can have saved numerous lives. I wouldn't even say numerous. I think we have saved together with Dr. Ladrito and all the doctors here at CDC Ph, all of those who have followed the protocols. I think it's conservative estimates. We have saved at least hundreds of thousands of lives, preventing them from being hospitalized and actually dying. So I think we still are hopeful that for some time in the very, very near future, the government will allow and actually reconsider using early treatment options for COVID, so that we won't be in a bind with regards to having people being locked down or quarantined. Thank you.
Thank you, Doc Iggy. All right, just a reminder for those who are just joining us, this Zoom presentation will be available on our CDC Ph with no spaces, CDC Ph Rumble channel, as well as our Concern.dx and CX of the Philippines Facebook page, and our Flatten the Fear PH YouTube channel. Now, since Facebook and YouTube have a tendency of censoring our material, the most reliable source will be our Rumble channel. So that's CDCPH with no spaces on Rumble. And we would also like to ask our presenters if they will be so kind as to to allow the dissemination of their presentations. Sir Nonoy and Doc Iggy, are you okay with that?
Yeah.
Thank you, Sir Noy. Anyway, we'll get an
Okay,
answer.
okay.
All right, thank you. Next to present will be, so the charts and the presentations you have seen so far will be available for dissemination via Dean. We'll just course everything through Dean Bernales again, if you guys don't mind. All right, so once again, if you have any questions and you're from the media, okay, please limit it to only those from the media. Please send your questions to Dean Bernales. He is found in the chat as Dean, Delta Echo Alpha November. Next to the microphone will be Professor Tanya Lat to speak on the legal aspects of the quandary we find ourselves in. Professor Tanya?
Yes, good afternoon, Mary, and good afternoon, everyone, most especially to those who are from the media joining us today. So my task this afternoon is to do a legal analysis of the Philippine COVID-19 response. Now, suffice it to say that I will be trying to summarize in 10 to 15 minutes what would otherwise take 2 to 3 hours of oral arguments before the Supreme Court. Okay, but be that as it may, I hope this discussion will be helpful to you. I will outline the broad strokes so that you have a general understanding of the framework, the constitutional framework that will help inform more specific, detailed legal issues, like, for example, the no vax, no entry, or the no vax, no ride policy. Now, first of all, I wish to acknowledge the presentations that have gone on ahead of me. Sir Nonoy Oplas, Doc Iggy Agbayani, Doc Homer Lim. Please keep their presentations in mind as we go through the legal issues one by one. Now, let's look at the Philippine COVID-19 response over the past year and a half. Okay, the government measures that have been taken include lockdowns, restriction of mobility, mass vaccination drives, including the latest one, which is scheduled this coming weekend for the children ages 5 to 11, and discrimination between the vaccinated and unvaccinated. Now, to justify these measures, the government has invoked the following. It has invoked the exercise of police power to protect the right to health. It has invoked the presumption of regularity and constitutionality of government measures. And it has also invoked the necessity of mandatory vaccination on the ground that this is the only viable solution so that we can get out of the COVID-19 pandemic. They are also forcing particular choices. They are saying that we must choose between public health measures versus individualized medicine, and that we must choose between police power, which is the power of the state to protect public health, versus individual human rights, the right of each Filipino to choose what is best for their health and which will be in their best interest in terms of bodily integrity. Now, they are saying, the government is saying that we have to choose between one or the other. This is a false choice. Okay, any constitutional scholar, any law student will tell you that the law is meant to reconcile all possible options. The Constitution in particular must be read as a totality and not merely a cherry picking of relevant provisions. Now, what are these particular provisions that we must consider? Article 2, Section 15 is the provision that you have heard all this time. The state shall protect and promote the right to health of the people and instill health consciousness among them. Okay, CDC Ph has no issue at all. In fact, this is the primary right that is being protected by the government measures to address the pandemic. However, we submit that this is by no means the only provision that must be taken into account. First of all, there's Article 2, Section 11 that says, the state values the dignity of every human person and guarantees full respect for human rights. There's Article 2, Section 4, the same article of the Constitution. The prime duty of the government is to serve and protect the people. Article 2, Section 5 provides the maintenance of peace and order, the protection of life, liberty, and property, and the promotion of the general welfare are essential for the enjoyment by all the people of the blessings of democracy. I've highlighted these provisions here because these are the provisions which matter in this particular instance. Government health measures must maintain peace and order and not promote anarchy or inconsistency among government agencies and between the public and private sector. Government measures must protect life, liberty, and property. They must promote the general welfare. And then they must make sure that all of these things redound to the enjoyment and benefit of all the people and not just particular segments of the population. Now, very crucial is Article 3, Section 1. If there's any provision in the Constitution that every Filipino must know and must be able to recite in their sleep, if they are rudely awakened in the middle of the night by a policeman or by a member of the military, this is the main provision that you should know to invoke your rights. This is, no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall any person be denied the equal protection of the laws. These two provisions taken together, I submit, and we submit as CDC Ph, are the two main provisions that must be reconciled by the Philippine government with regard to their COVID-19 response and any public health response to any future emergencies and public health pandemics. Now, with regard to the exercise of police power, so as mentioned earlier, you have heard Secretary Guevara and many other members of government say that the government measures being enacted at the national and local levels are in exercise of police power. Okay, the exercise of police power is not unfettered. It is not without limits. The limits of police power are laid out by the Constitution and by international human rights obligations that the Philippines has subscribed to. The exercise of police power must employ reasonable means towards a reasonable end. Hindi pwedeng the end justifies the means. Both the means and the end have to be reasonable, and they have to be properly supported by fact and by law. Okay. They must be exercised without grave abuse of discretion, meaning that while Congress and while the executive branches of government have discretionary power, they have so-called wisdom to make decisions on behalf of the Philippine citizenry. They cannot gravely abuse their discretion. And when they do, the courts can step in, and the court has stepped in many times to tell the executive and legislative branches when they have exceeded the limits of their authority. The exercise of police power also must use means that are least restrictive of fundamental constitutional rights. Imagine that you have a whole toolbox of possible options or a whole range of medicines that can be used to address a particular sickness or disease. Constitutional law, jurisprudence on police power says that when there are least restrictive or less restrictive means of addressing the disease or the public emergency, means which are less restrictive of fundamental constitutional human rights, those means must be used. Means which are most restrictive of fundamental rights have been and should be struck down. Now, with regard to the presumption of regularity and constitutionality, again, this has been bandied about. They're saying that you have to presume that official duty has been performed regularly, that the laws are constitutional until they are challenged. Okay, while that is true, this is a mere disputable presumption, meaning it can be rebutted and it can be contradicted and overcome by other evidence. Much of that evidence has already been discussed in the previous presentations by Sir Nonoy, Doc Iggy, and Doc Homer. Now, what presumptions can be disputed? And you can ask any law student or any one of your colleagues who has taken law. Okay. A person is innocent of crime or wrong. An unlawful act was done with an unlawful intent. Evidence willfully suppressed would be adverse if produced. Official duty has been regularly performed, and that the law has been obeyed. All of these are presumptions, but they can be contradicted. They can be disputed. So we submit that there is more than ample evidence to dispute the presumption of regularity and the performance of official duty in the various government measures undertaken over the past year and a half. Now, government has often invoked public health measures, right? As we mentioned at the start of this presentation, public health is a valid right that should be protected, but it should not be at the expense of human rights, other human rights, such as the right to life and the right to liberty, the right to not be the subject of medical or scientific experimentation, the right to not be tortured, the right to not lose your life because of adverse events that were not informed to you when you were given the injection. Public health measures should factor in the totality and indivisibility of human rights. Again, it is not either or. We do not cherry pick. If it's possible to reconcile everything, we can and we should. Public health measures also should consider all possible viable alternatives and not focus solely on one single solution. CDC Ph has been going to government since the end of 2020, showing that there are other viable alternatives to the hospital prescribed medicines, but sadly they have been ignored. They have been vilified. Low-cost, highly effective alternatives available in other countries have been shut down, censored on Facebook. Many people I know have been put in Facebook jail because they have posted about ivermectin and other alternatives which have been proven to work. Now, we strongly state, unequivocally, IATF resolutions, MMDA resolutions, executive orders, and LGU ordinances, as well as private sector or issuances, company policies that prescribe mandatory vaccination directly contravene Republic Act 11525, which is a law passed by Congress. You have an instance where you have mere executive issuances going against the law of the land. That is clearly illegal and unconstitutional. Particular provisions of RA 11525 that you should know. Section 2C recognizes the experimental nature of COVID-19 vaccines. It states in very clear terms that the COVID-19 vaccines currently on the market and which are under EUA, emergency use authorization, are experimental in nature. They have not completed phase 3 clinical trials. Ladies and gentlemen, we are in the middle of the largest medical experiment being done in the history of the human race. What is happening now in the Philippines is happening in countries all over the world. This is a mass experiment, and many Filipinos have not been informed of their right to refuse to be part of this mass experiment. Section 12 of the same law states that the vaccine card shall not be considered as an additional mandatory requirement for educational, employment, and other similar government transaction purposes. In a huddle that was attended by Senate President Tito Soto, he stated very clearly that the intent of the law was to not make COVID-19 vaccination mandatory, as indicated in this particular provision. And in fact, there's nothing in the law that says that every Filipino must be vaccinated for COVID-19. So for people to say that there is legal basis for mandatory vaccination, they can look no further than RA 11525, which expressly says the intent of the law and points out the experimental nature of the vaccines. Moreover, the same section says individuals vaccinated against COVID-19 shall not be considered immune from COVID-19 unless otherwise declared by the DOH based on reliable scientific evidence and consensus. For government to say that people who are vaccinated are exempt from RT-PCR or antigen testing by the mere fact of vaccination are expressly violating this provision, which says that there is no immunity that is automatically granted by the mere fact of vaccination. So again, this is a clear illegal act, a breach of Section 12 of RA 11525. Now, CDC Ph submits that mandatory vaccination is unconstitutional, whether this is prescribed by IATF Resolution 148B, by the various local government executive orders or ordinances, or by company policy. Now, I'll just run through. This is what we discussed earlier. Okay, Philippine Constitution provides for these various provisions. Okay, and the most important again is Article 3, Section 1. No one shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall any person be denied the equal protection of the laws. Forced vaccination violates human rights. We are party to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Article 6.1 provides that every human being has the inherent right to life. This right shall be protected by law. No one shall be arbitrarily deprived of his life. Article 7 of the ICCPR says, no one shall be subjected to torture or to cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. In particular, no one shall be subjected without his or her free consent to medical or scientific experimentation. And again, I cannot stress enough, this is a medical experiment. It is admitted in Section 2C of RA 11525, and by the fact that this has not completed phase 3 clinical trials, a fact that the DOH cannot deny. Article 18.1 of the ICCPR says that everyone shall have the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion, and many Filipinos are objecting to the COVID-19 vaccines on the ground that this violates natural law and the right to bodily integrity, which is prescribed by the religion. No one shall be subject to coercion, which would impair his freedom to have or to adopt a religion or belief of his choice. And it is worth citing that public emergencies cannot restrict or remove these fundamental rights. I repeat, public emergencies cannot restrict or remove these fundamental rights. Article 4 of the ICCPR is very clear that the right to life, the right to not be subjected to medical experimentation without consent, and the right to freedom of thought and conscience cannot be derogated from, even during times of public emergency. So even if the government says that this is a public health emergency, it does not change the fact that the right to life, the right to not be subjected to medical experimentation, and the right to freedom of thought still and should always be upheld at all times. Now, with regard to the discrimination between the unvaccinated and the vaccinated, again, this is a violation of human rights and of the Constitution. The ICCPR states that all persons are equal before the law and are entitled without any discrimination to the equal protection of the law. We have laws that prohibit discrimination against people with HIV and AIDS. The Bayanihan to Recover as One Act also provided a penal provision for discrimination against people suspected to have COVID. So discrimination is illegal and it's anti-human rights and should not be tolerated. The discrimination between the vaccinated and unvaccinated is unconstitutional. It is unreasonable and is not supported either in fact or in law. Moreover, the discrimination is hitting the poorest of the poor worst of all. The people who are affected by the no vax, no ride, or the no vax, no work, or the no vax, no service policy are the poor, the working poor. And so these government measures do not protect the poor, but actually oppress them. Again, Article 3, Section 1 says that no one shall be denied the equal protection of the laws. Okay? There is no valid scientific and factual basis for discriminating between vaccinated and unvaccinated. If we look at the events of this past January, when the NCR encountered an unprecedented surge of COVID cases, we all know people close to us getting sick. Banks were closed, the courtrooms were closed, certain government agencies, certain media outfits could not operate because their staff were down with COVID, notwithstanding the fact that they were vaccinated. So it became an instance where the unvaccinated actually are the ones who have been left standing. The unvaccinated are the ones who have remained healthy throughout this time. And the vaccinated and even the people who received boosters are the ones who were struck down with Omicron. What does this show us? It shows us that in truth and in fact, both the vaxxed and unvaxxed can transmit COVID. they can get infected with COVID. And in certain instances, they can get severe COVID and even die from it. So if there was any doubt as to whether the unvaccinated or the vaccinated were immune from COVID, Omicron has demolished all theories to the contrary. The vaccinated, we have seen from our own personal experience, can transmit COVID, can get infected with COVID, and can get severe COVID and die from it. Therefore, it does not make sense to only test the unvaccinated as if they are the only carriers of the disease. Both vaccinated and unvaccinated must undergo RT-PCR testing or antigen testing, or the more sensible thing to do would be to simply base it on symptoms. If people show symptoms of COVID, then they should be made to quarantine and isolate themselves. Perhaps not need to be tested anymore, but to be treated as if they have COVID already. That would save a lot of time, a lot of money. And for Filipinos who receive less than 15,000 a month, the COVID RT-PCR tests are a luxury that they cannot afford. Having them get tested on their own expense is cruel and inhuman and definitely against human rights. And so the insistence on COVID-19 vaccination to the exclusion of all other viable alternatives is unreasonable, unconstitutional, and a gravely abusive exercise of police power. Doc Homer mentioned in passing that there are other viable alternatives, and CDC Ph has not, hindi po nagkulang ang CDC Ph to go knocking on so many government doors to tell government that there are viable alternatives. We do not have to have so many people die from COVID because there are low-cost solutions which are available. What are these? There is prevention and early treatment. And I speak from personal experience when I say this because I had COVID during the Delta surge. I had many friends and colleagues pass away during the time that my husband and I were sick with COVID. By God's grace, our case was mild. We were able to treat ourselves at home. I was unvaccinated. We were unvaccinated at the time. And we were able to treat ourselves with home care remedies. Home care remedies like garlic, turmeric, ginger, steam inhalation, suob. Things that our conventional doctors have dismissed as being folk remedies. Well, the truth is the folk remedies work, and I am living proof of that. A healthy immune system is what will get us through the pandemic, not a reliance on false vaccine-induced immunity. Prevention and early treatment are the way to get out of this pandemic, and if more people found out about this, the DOH only came out with their home care guide in January, when we were already circulating this as early as November and December. If more Filipinos had health consciousness instilled in them through holistic treatment methods, then we would not have to worry so much about COVID. We can beat COVID because COVID is now becoming endemic. It is now just going to be like the flu. The doctors can also attest that there are low-cost, repurposed drugs like ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, zinc, vitamin C, etc. Doctors from CDC Ph have been talking about this many times over, and many people attest to the fact that these have worked. Certain senators have told us that they are using ivermectin, and that has helped keep them COVID-free. These are low-cost, repurposed drugs. They do not have to require expensive hospitalization. They do not have to require driving entire families into bankruptcy because they cannot pay the expensive hospital bills. These are ways to save the population, and the DOH is not looking into them. Doc Iggy also mentioned that there's the need for focused protection. Most of the COVID deaths really happen to those who have comorbidities and people who are seniors. That is where we should focus the protection. But the advice, and I also have been doing my own reading together with the advice of the doctors, is that if you are healthy and you're below 60 years of age, you do not have to worry about COVID. The survival rate of COVID is very high. And if you look at the percentage of deaths from COVID, it is actually very low compared to the other, to the whole total number of deaths, which is why an inquiry into the excess deaths must be looked into immediately. Okay? And also, it is worth stating that the children are the least likely to die from COVID. They have less than 0.5%, if I'm not mistaken, from dying from COVID. but they are at greater risk for receiving and experiencing injuries and adverse events from the vaccines, which again are experimental. And so in closing, we wish to submit that an unjust law is no law at all. Law was made for the people, not the people for the law. And when the law is weaponized and used to oppress the people, then that law should not be justified and should not be followed anymore. And so in closing, we submit that mandatory vaccination, most especially of the children, is immoral, illegal, unconstitutional, and violative of fundamental human rights.
Thank you,
Mar-
Professor Tanya. Yeah,
Yes.
thank you.
Thank you.
Now we'll like to turn over the floor to the president of the Philippine Chambers of Commerce and Industry, Sir George Barcelon. Good afternoon, po, Sir George.
You may unmute po, Sir
Please
George.
unmute na lang, Sir George.
Yep. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir. Loud and
Yes. Good afternoon, Mari and Dr. Iggy, and to all the televiewers. I see Dr. Homer also. I'm really here to share some of my thoughts regarding what's happening, especially from the business sector side. We are, about 2 weeks ago, there was a promulgation about people not vaxxed are not allowed to take public transportation. And we in the business sector side, we were against that. We said, people are having a difficult time working, looking for livelihoods, and here you're limiting their mobility. And I'm glad the government acceded, and they have rescinded that ruling that only vaccinated people will be allowed to take public transportation. Of course, all of you know very well that the alert level has been reduced to alert level 2, and that has expanded more economic activities. The indoor service sectors can accommodate 50%, outdoor can accommodate 70%. But aside from that, we want seeing what the other countries are doing, Denmark, UK, and some of the European countries. They've really opened up. They have come to realize that we have to live with COVID. Okay, we know that it's there, but we have seen that the last variant, Omicron, is not as severe as the other strain. Having said that, I think the data in itself shows that the number of infection has come down, and what's even more important is the number of fatality. Okay. We are looking forward to a more relaxed quarantine protocol. I have mentioned in one of the interview with some news media that we encourage the government to really make available affordable testing kits, as what Ms. Taya Lat presented earlier. People get infected with the COVID pandemic, whether you're vaccinated, you're not vaccinated, you've been getting booster or whatnot. So in that light, it would be good if the government really get the public sector to participate, or the private sectors to participate in monitoring themselves. Okay, if these tests are made available at the barangay level, so people can test themselves. And one of the things that we have been pushing really is the reopening of schools. Okay. Our young people have sacrificed the last 2 years not being able to go to schools, and it's a big burden on the low-income earner when they have to pay broadband cards for their children to study. and it's really difficult because many of them cannot afford laptops or whatever, and they're using cell phone. My people that I know, I mean, they would tell me that they need money to buy a laptop or whatnot. So it's really difficult. But the sad thing is the quality of the education. We are already in the last year, our tests as far as educational standard in the PISA, we rank one of the lowest. Okay? And having this reset of 2 years, not being able to go to school, I think we will not fare well in the next meeting, in the next testing. So we hope that the government will hear the side of the private sectors that earlier, as was mentioned, that there are prophylaxis, there are treatment for this COVID-19. And the government should really take a serious look on those available prophylaxis because they have, internationally, with, I think many countries have proven that they are effective in mitigating or in the recovery of those infected. So we look forward to that on the private sector, we keep on getting our message to be heard by the government sector. And we know that we have some supporters, both in the lower house and the upper house, that through their own experience, that they are able to get, they are able to recover from the infection. So I congratulate the organizer of this meeting, really to spread or to let our population, general population, know that going forward through this cooperation between private and public sectors, that the economy will open up, and hope that in the shortest time we will have a normal life. Maraming salamat po. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sir George. And now to follow Sir George is our very own co-founder and spokesman, Francis Abraham. Francis?
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the CDC Ph's press conference. Before I read the call to action of CDC Ph, I'd like to make it clear that CDC Ph is not an anti-vax organization. No, we have doctors who have vaccinated people with safe vaccines throughout the years. Okay, so please do not call us anti-vaxxers. So I shall proceed to the call to action of the CDC Ph. In light of all the medical and scientific data that has been presented, the concerned doctors and citizens of the Philippines humbly requests that President Rodrigo Duterte immediately do the following. 1. Suspend all vaccination efforts based on the lack of short and long-term safety data for all of these experimental vaccines until it has been proven beyond any doubt that they provide immunization without any major adverse effects. Something is causing the sudden deaths of thousands of Filipinos starting March 2021. With 180,000 excess deaths from March to September 2021, this may be the deadliest 7 months on record in the Philippines a year after COVID-19 started. This massive surge of excess deaths is correlated with vaccination rollouts and must therefore be stopped and investigated now. Please take note that there are only 38,294 total confirmed COVID-19 deaths from March 2020 to September 30, 2021. As a reminder again to the press, we are not anti-vaxxers or anti-vaccine as long as it passes the safety standards. Number 2, we should bring to a complete and total halt the planned inoculation of children 5 to 11 years old, as there is clearly no medical benefit to support this odious plan. Clinical data has proven that 99.97% of children will survive COVID even if left untreated. To expose children to the risk of death, myocarditis, pericarditis, and other adverse events as a result of vaccination is utterly immoral, and if it results in death, can be considered an act of murder. Our children are not guinea pigs and should never have been considered as the potential subjects of this unnecessary experimentation. To harm our children is to tread on dangerous ground. We strongly recommend that the Duterte administration not test our people on this. Enough innocent blood has already been shed. It needs to stop now. Number 3, end all lockdowns. The world-renowned scientist Albert Einstein once spoke the words to this effect. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Data from all over the world has already proven that lockdowns do not work, precisely because the virus is an aerosol. One cannot stop an aerosol from spreading all over the country. Punishing our people and the economy with more lockdowns, granular or not, will help no one but the monopolists now running the country. The administration needs to face the facts. The DOH, PSMID, PMA, OCTA, Dr. Edsel Salvania and company were wrong, and Sweden was right. Also right were the authors of the Great Barrington Declaration. Stanford's Dr. Bhattacharya, Oxford's Dr. Gupta, and Harvard's Dr. Kulldorff. It is time for the government to stop taking bad advice from our so-called experts and advisors with serious conflicts of interest and who, in this pandemic, has been proven wrong over and over again in the last 2 years. It is time to start listening to the true experts because it is they who got it right. Number 4, we have to learn to live with the real science behind virus management, rather than attempting to create the virus-free bubble of 7,641 islands, which is the fantasy world envisioned by some of the DOH's experts. As better advised countries and states living in the real world have chosen to do, Filipinos too must learn to live with the virus and acknowledge, accept, and adopt proven effective and cheap early treatment options with proven safety records as well as medical protocols that prevent hospitalizations and death among the vulnerable. The Indian state of Uttar Pradesh is just one case in point. Between the CDC Ph's doctors and like-minded doctors all over the world, millions have been successfully and affordably treated with these protocols. Apart from the real-world data, these protocols and medicines are all backed by numerous scientific studies and papers. Hence, the CDC Ph detests the cheap propaganda being maliciously thrown against these effective medications. The CDC Ph is likewise appalled at the smear campaign and intimidation tactics being employed against its doctors who have used these protocols effectively and cheaply with zero corruption dollars from big pharma. How discouraging it is to find that instead of receiving congratulatory praises from their peers, our doctors are instead repeatedly maligned for saving lives and reducing hospitalizations. Number 5, we ask you to support and actively defend laws already in place, such as RA 11525, and end all discriminatory practices against unvaccinated. The Philippines is supposed to be a nation of laws, not IATF or MMDA resolutions or unconstitutional LGU mandates. Number 6, we ask for the implementation of a focused protection plan which the concerned doctors and citizens of the Philippines has been recommending to the Duterte administration since October of 2020. We must focus our protection on the elderly and those with comorbidities within our communities, from serious COVID infection through prophylaxis and health and immunity boosting education programs. Number 7, we call for the reopening of the economy and schools. Set all our people free, just as other countries have done. All health recommendations must be made 100% voluntary, never mandatory. Mask wearing has already been proven to cause serious damage to our children, both medically and psychologically. This torture and abuse of our children needs to stop now. Mr. President, we have been reaching out to you and writing you since September of 2020, hoping to be given a hearing. Today, almost a year and a half later, we once again hold out to that hope. Nais lang po naming makatulong sa ating bansang minamahal. The concerned doctors and citizens of the Philippines would also like to call on the LGUs, all departments of the administration, to end all forms of discrimination and coercion against unvaccinated individuals. We ask the legislative branch to cease proposing or considering legislation that would lead to mandatory vaccinations, such as the proposed vaccine passport program. And we ask the judicial branch to rise to the defense of the Constitution and to protect our people's God-given rights and liberties duly acknowledged therein. We call on restaurant and mall owners and all other businesses to cease all forms of coercive policies to get their employees vaccinated, such as the need for constant RT-PCR tests, which put an enormous financial burden on workers who have chosen not to get vaccinated. Again, we remind you, since both vaccinated and unvaccinated can spread the virus, you are discriminating against the unvaccinated. You can be held accountable for this. And remember, when you open your business only to the 60 million who have been reportedly been vaccinated in the Philippines, you are closing it to 50 million more. No business in the Philippines today can afford to make such a mistake. And finally, to the media, we could pose this question. The emergency use authorizations under which these vaccines and COVID medications were approved by former FDA Director General Dr. Eric Domingo and his FDA require that all subjects of this medical experimentation must be able to give their informed consent. Have the FDA or any arm of the DOH ever shown proof that they publicly and openly discussed in mass or social media the potential adverse effects of the vaccines and the other medications so far granted EUAs? For example, do you have a video of or audio interviews of Drs. Domingo, Duque, and Verheire in which they warned parents that vaccinating their children, especially their male children, could cause myocarditis or pericarditis and possibly even result in the child's death? Have you ever heard the DOH tell the public that the mortality rate for children infected and untreated for COVID is below 0.027%, meaning that the risk of COVID to their children is practically zero? Do you have video or audio of DOH officials clearly stating to the public that they should not seek vaccinations if they have pre-existing conditions? If not, how did the 60 million vaccinees in the Philippines grant informed consent if they were never thus informed? From day one, all the concerned doctors and citizens of the Philippines has been after is to protect the health and lives and livelihoods of our people. And when it became necessary, defend their rights and liberties as well. If that is your heartbeat, then you are more than welcome to join us. It is time for all of us to admit that the country has been heading down the wrong path for far too long. It is time to correct our course. Time to make some tough decisions. At huling paalala po, hindi po kami ang kaaway. Hindi rin kami kontra bakuna kung pasado ito sa masusing pag-aaral at safety standards, katulad ng ibang bakuna. Iisa ang hangarin natin na magsalba ng buhay at ng kabuhayan. Itigil ang censorship at palakasin ang pampublikong diskurso. Buhay po natin at buhay ng mga anak natin ang nakasalalay. We can still heal together as one, but you will need to make that choice. Respectfully yours, the concerned doctors and citizens of the Philippines. Maraming salamat po.
Maraming salamat, Francis. And now we'll turn over the floor to Dean Bernales. For those in the media who have questions, please send your questions via the chat to Dean. That's Delta Echo Alpha November, Dean. And Dean will now take the floor. Dean, thank you.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. So these are the questions from the media. First, I think this is addressed to Sir George Barcelon of PCCI. Sir, are you still there?
Sir George?
Yes, he's still here.
There he is.
Okay. Hi, Sir George.
Yes, I'm still here.
Yeah, good afternoon. The first question is addressed to you. The question is, does PCCI has a proposed economic recovery for the Philippines? If yes, what should be the first step?
Well, it's really to open up, and that's what we've been talking about, that the practice of self-testing. I'm not a medical expert, but I'm just reading off from what other countries are doing, both in Singapore, certain parts of the United States and Europe, that while they're opening up, they have to do they have to allow people to self-test, and so that in case there is a cluster of infection, you can capture it early and treat it. Okay. Other than that, we have strong macroeconomic fundamentals. Of course, we were disrupted by the COVID pandemic. Our exports in 2020 has gone down, but it had bounced back in 2021. Our average GDP growth for the year 2021 is about 5.5. The last quarter was pretty good. It was about 7.7, primarily because we reverted back to, we had alert level 2, and there were more economic activities. So those are the things that we look forward to, that the government, taking into partnership the private sector, we have more visibility on the ground. And we do not, we discourage this mass lockdown or whatever. We do it by encouraging them to do granularity. We have local chambers that can help coordinate certain areas if the numbers are going up, and if need be, we have to do a isolated quarantine. But other than that, I think the time is what we're seeing now. The time is proper for us to move ahead cautiously. Okay, I'm not saying that again. This thing, our enemy, the COVID-19 pandemic, is invisible. Okay, so we have to move forward cautiously. But if you take the general populace into the loop as part of the equations, that they can test themselves, and I know people are responsible now. If they know that they're sick, they would not be going, to work or to expose themselves to other people. The test that I've been reading in Singapore and also in India, it costs about $3 per kid. So that works out about 200, 300 pesos. I suggested to the government to repurpose the money allocated for contact tracing. Every year, the last 2 years, the government spent in the billions of pesos hiring people for contact tracing. I would suggest that they repurpose that money to provide and make available affordable testing kits at the barangay level. So once we have confidence, because this is purely building confidence in the private sectors, and it's very important for us to have that confidence that even not only from the economic point of view, but really on the education side of education concern. So that's how we will open up the economy. It's we don't have to really invent new things or new policies. It's all there. Once the government opens up, the transportation issue, gradually our economy will recover and rebound. Thank you.
Last question, sir. Within PCCI, what are your initiatives to lessen the negative impact of the pandemic to the members of PCCI or to the businesses in the Philippines in general?
Well, over the 2 years, we were involved in the procurement of earlier the rapid test, okay, because many of our members are clamoring. They want their workers to be able to report to work, but they're afraid also that they might be contagious. So that was one. And we also participated in having our members, those who are interested to learn more about the vaccines. Okay, now it is really up to them. Nowadays, people do read a lot, no, about either the safety or the efficacy of this vaccination, and but we're always maintain that this is on a voluntary basis. It cannot be mandated, okay, and then you cannot use the people who aren't vaccinated to be discriminated upon. So we have been very consistent in that. As a matter of fact, many of our members really, out of their concern for their workers, their livelihood, many of us do our testing, in order to have our workers report to work. At least that's the minimum that we can do. That when they report to work, alam namin na negative sila, no? At least, I don't know how accurate this PCR test is, no? Some claim it's 50%, 60% accurate. The rapid antigen test is similarly, the efficacy is similarly around that figure. But I think it's better than none. Okay, it's better than working in the blind. So having certain protocols that we set up, many businesses do that. Okay, and it has been able to, it has proven to us that manageable. Okay, we don't have to lock down. You remember the early part of 2020. I mean, you totally locked down, and really the economy plunged almost by 20%. Okay, we cannot afford that. If we go to that again, taking that direction, as I think it was Francis who mentioned, we're digging ourselves in a deeper hole, and we may not come out. Okay, so at this point in time, people like you, I mean, you are all concerned citizens, and I think you have played the role in helping the economy, in helping the society bounce back. I in some of the meetings that previously that I attend with IATF, I openly tell them that you're lucky because you have citizens who are responsible citizens and disciplined citizens. When you tell us lockdown, at that time, no question us. Lockdown tayo lahat. Diba? But up to a certain point, when the policies taken is not in line with what can be done, knowing that what we know, then we would advise them otherwise. Earlier, I mentioned that prophylaxis are available. The government now should concentrate more on the treatment. Okay, you're bound to be infected. I made a sort of a Google search, and I found out, aside from COVID-19, there are almost, I think, 50 to 80 strains of flu every year in the States. 80 strains, but people don't talk about it. The big pharma just wants to talk about COVID-19. Okay? So it's the flu or COVID-19 is part of our lives. Okay, how it will mutate down the line, it's hard to say. Okay? But I would think that all the precautions that we've taken, all the protocols, over time have helped us to reach this point. It may not be very ideal, but at least we're seeing going towards 2022. We hope that things would be much better. We cling on to the report every day that the number of infection will go down lower from the previous day. You know, we hit a high of almost 30,000 COVID infected people a day. Now, don't ask me whether that's accurate or not. I sometimes have my doubt, okay, whether this reporting of the numbers are all accurate. But I would take it that the morbidity, the number of people, sad to say, who passed away because of COVID, is gradually going down. Okay? If we were to compare the number of people passing away from different ailment compared to COVID, then we would realize that it's becoming, the COVID-19 is becoming sort of within the range of morbidity of other sickness. Okay, once we can see that, then we realize, then we face it, without any what you call extreme fear. Okay, because it's the extreme fear that leads us to take actions that really, instead of really helping people lives, no. Pag wala kang hanap buhay, I mean, it's even worse. So this is where we are trying to balance it, no. And I've heard many of the forum that CDC have organized, and it's good that you're sharing informations with the public, and you move on, like all of us. I mean, we are, for those who are in business, for those who are doctors and other professions, we need to move on, and the only way we can move on is really having a government, open up in a sensible way, providing affordable test kits, and having this practice, no? As what I've said earlier, Singapore is doing that. Singapore gives its household 6 kits. Now, I don't know whether that's for a month or for what, but it's given for free. Of course, Singapore can afford it. They're rich government. But even here, what I'm saying is we can repurpose the money that were originally allocated for contact tracing. We don't need contact tracing anymore. Might as well get the people in the loop. Sila mismo, they will be responsible, part of the citizen. And this will help build up the confidence we have in moving ahead. Thank you. Are there any other questions?
That's
Thank you, Sir
all. Thank
George.
you, Sir George.
Okay, thank you.
Now,
I'm sorry, but I have to go ahead.
yeah,
Thank you, Sir George. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Bye.
Now we will be moving on to the next question from Melanie Season of SciDev, a science news website. I think this question is addressed to Doc Iggy. Her question is, what's the window in terms of time in which the deaths can possibly be attributed to the COVID vaccinations? Again, the question is, what's the window in terms of time in which the deaths can possibly be attributed to the COVID vaccinations?
Doc Iggy?
We don't know. Kasi that's a problem with not having long-term studies yet. So, for example, in ADE, as an antibody-dependent enhancement, it could be even as long as 1 year. You can still have antibody-dependent enhancement. Do we see them immediately? It could be something that's building up. Fertility issues. If you're, you may not know that you have fertility issues now. Then 5 years later, you find out you can't give birth, or you're just sterile. So things like that. There is really no time frame for measuring that, and that's why these data on excess deaths, even drops in birth rates, are issues to be considered highly, kasi big numbers Yan ang problem sa small numbers. When we do report, you only see, but the bigger picture cannot be seen by those numbers.
Thank you, Doc Iggy.
Are you
Dean?
done, Doc Iggy? Okay, we move to the next question.
Ay, naputol siguro yung yung connection.
Yeah.
Yan, putol. Okay.
Yeah. These questions are from TV5. First question is, does CDC have a data of the number of deaths because of the COVID vaccine and the number of deaths and who has been hospitalized / severe case because of COVID, who are fully vaccinated and those unvaxxed? Again, do you have a data of the number of deaths because of COVID vaccine and a data of the number of deaths who has been hospitalized due to severe case because of COVID who are fully vaccinated and those unvaxxed?
Yeah. So first question, our FDA is actually collecting that. We have our similar to virus. These are reported on their website and they update this about monthly. If, for example, you just want to know the number of reported deaths as of I think it was December, it's around 1,700 reported deaths. Now, they do not admit that these are sure to be caused by vaccines. These are just reported deaths. So they still have to publish something about kung talaga bang this is highly correlated or just associated to the vaccination. Now, that is why I'm saying it's a little difficult to get it kasi sometimes it's actually most of the time it's unreported. For example, you get a heart attack about 3 weeks after vaccination. Some people don't even think it was the vaccine. It would not be reported. Or if you get a stroke 3 or 4 weeks after the vaccination. Because nga, hindi talaga po pwede sabihin na, okay, pag hindi nangyari within a few days, it's not vaccine. Inflammation could be a slow process. Some even could, for example, yung diabetes, it could trigger an uncontrollable sugar if after a few days pa, pwedeng mangyari po yun. And it could be accumulating. But of course, it was triggered by the vaccine. Now, if you want bigger numbers, meron po sa US, yung sa buyers, sa VG Access, I think they're numbering around nasa 20,000. But again, underreported. That is why we should be more vigilant. And in excess deaths is one of those things na parang underreported. Why would you suddenly have a spike? Kasi nga, for example, smoking before, we had difficulty trying to prove that every smoker who died of, say, heart disease, masasabing that smoking was related to the heart disease. But it was the correlation of the smokers and heart disease that proved eventually that it was from smoking. So that's how important these numbers are. We have to get big numbers from these excess deaths. I think the other question was about comparing vaccinated to unvaccinated, in severe hospitalizations. Now, first of all, you cannot actually use it quite easily. For example, if the population has a majority or unvaccinated, say 90% unvaccinated, of course, the hospitalizations will show more people getting admitted who are unvaccinated. If you get more people who are vaccinated, of course, it will show more people who are vaccinated who get hospitalized. Now, hindi po kasi siya randomized. Again, there is bias po kasi ang pag-select ng vaccinated over unvaccinated. And why do I say this? For example, you have to be screened to get vaccinated. So if you are very, very sick, they will not give you vaccine. So that already is a selection bias of the vaccinated. Kasi hindi ka pwedeng kung you have already 4 or 5 comorbidities, they will say you're not safe to vaccinate. So that already limits the study comparing vaccinated and unvaccinated. And lastly, what if those people who died, say 180,000 people that we have said excess deaths, were really caused by vaccination? So how will you now say that they could be hospitalized if they already died? In other words, parang naunahan na nga ng vaccine. I'm not saying that is exactly true, but what if that the people die before they could even get to the hospital because of the vaccine? So they will not be counted as vaccinated.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Doc Iggy. Another question from TV5. What can you say about the protein-based COVID vaccine? Do you think it is better option than mRNA vaccine? Again, the question is, what can you say about the protein-based COVID vaccine? Do you think it is better option than mRNA vaccine?
Okay, it in theory, it may look good, no? Kasi protein-based, you get more receptor sites, you will recognize more of the virus as compared to mRNA. But the advantage of mRNA being easier to change, to manufacture. But then again, never use that kind of a basis to determine if a vaccine is to be chosen to be used or not. The best way really talaga is through experiments. You wait for the result of the experiments. Kasi no matter how much they say that this is from a protein base, this is for mRNA, you will never know for sure if it's safe. So they tell me, theoretically, Doc, pwede. Sure, and theoretically, ano naman di ba? We could die theoretically. We can get side effects theoretically. So that's the importance of doing big trials before, kasi dati nga wala naman emergency use. Now we have it. And now we are seeing problems. And you know, how can you complain now? We accepted the fact na mRNA are okay, protein-based are okay, etc.
Okay. Last question from TV5. What is your message to parents who are thinking of whether to give the COVID vax to children 5 years and above?
As I've shown in the slides, you can see that from up to 11 years of age, practically no one of the kids even get infected or even die from the COVID-19. So that tells you there is no risk of dying from COVID-19 practically from 0 to 11. So then I showed you that there is a potential risk of dying from, in fact, not potential, in fact, some signs that people can die from the vaccine. Big numbers, around 80,000. So why would you take that risk? Based on those numbers alone, the benefits of getting vaccination far does not at all to adults. Perhaps the only group that might be benefit from it, yung talagang make high risk group above 60, above 65, that may benefit. But again, it looks like that they are also the that could also die from the vaccine. So unfortunately, I'm not for vaccination.
Dean, may I add that the CDC Ph has called for the stop of the vaccination rollout for children. So the message is very clear as to the position of the CDC Ph regarding whether what our advice to mothers are. We're calling for the president to stop the rollout for children. Thank you.
Thank you for that insights. Moving on to the next question. These questions are from Richa Noriaga of GMA News. Are you in favor on the no vaccination, no ride implemented by DOTR, limiting public transportation access to fully vaccinated individuals? I think we have released a statement about it, expressing our dissent. So maybe you can just expound. Maybe someone from CDC can just expound about your stance against this policy of no vaccination, no ride.
Well, I think yung public transport is a public service. So I think the only rule that they could impose is that if you are sick, whether or not you're vaccinated or not, no, you should not be allowed to go in a public transport vehicle. I think that is the only rule that we all follow. There's practically no difference between the vaccinated and the unvaccinated nowadays because of the Omicron affecting everyone, and it has been proven that it does not prevent transmission. Show me a paper that shows that these old vaccines are preventing transmission. They may slow it down, but definitely they do not prevent it. And the other thing is they claim that you have less symptoms. So now, what if you are sick but you have no symptoms and you are allowed to ride a public transport because you're vaccinated, you're less sick, and we all know you can still transmit? Wouldn't that be the more dangerous situation? But of course, we are not calling for mandatory prevention of vaccinated to ride public transport. We are not. We are still saying that the risk is very small in either groups, vaccinated or unvaccinated.
Okay, thank you for that, Doc Iggy. Another question
Dean,
is,
1 second. You might want to call on Dr. Jody Dalmasión to respond to your earlier question. I believe she has a response.
sure. Is this the question with regards to the protein vaccine?
Yes.
Okay.
Dr.
Sure,
Jody?
go
It's
ahead, Doc.
okay. I'm just participating through the chat.
Okay, see.
Alright.
In a protein base, you have a specific amount, of the antigen. So in messenger RNA, you are giving the genetic code that will code for the spike protein in an amount that you do not know. Because once inside the body, it will produce several times over. You don't know how long, where it will go, and how much. So even in years, in months, it may be producing microthrombi. Thank you.
Thank you, Doc. Dean, there's Dr. Romy Quijano would also like to participate.
Sure, go ahead.
Yes, I'd like to add more explanation on the protein-based vaccines. I think we should also know how these are being produced. And we should remember that this is also genetically engineered vaccine. They engineer the gene that would produce the spike protein into a baculovirus. It's also another kind of virus. And then they insert that into an insect cell, which will produce the spike proteins through the DNA of the baculovirus that would instruct the insect cell in producing the spike proteins. And then they'll just harvest the spike proteins produced. So that's what they call the protein-based vaccine. But in trying to produce and harvest the spike proteins, you cannot entirely discount the possibility of contaminants coming from the baculovirus or the genomic fragments from that baculovirus that might be still in that solution that has been harvested. They have not presented any data that would show that they are assured that there is no contaminant in this end product. Aside from that, the dangers of genetically modified products like this one cannot also be discounted, as I've already written about this before. It would be like what you could see in the adenovirus vaccines. So we should think also of the other mechanisms.
Doc?
Okay.
Sorry, naputol yata si Doc Romy. Doc Romy?
Let's get back to him na lang once it is on again. Okay, moving on to the next question of GMA News. Does CDC Ph agree with the government's decision to lift the facility-based quarantine requirement for foreign travelers and returning overseas Filipinos who are fully vaccinated against COVID-19? Again, the question is, do you agree with the government's decision to lift the facility-based quarantine requirement for foreign travelers and returning overseas Filipinos who are fully vaccinated against COVID-19?
Doc Homer, Doc Iggy?
Yeah. So for the quarantine, because especially now that we have our early treatment options, we don't really need to send our OFWs to a quarantine facility because that would add more expenses on their own pocket. So what we suggest would be they do the test, and then even though it's tested negative, we still recommend them to at least quarantine at home for 5 days. If they have symptoms, then they check. If they don't have symptoms, then they can go out and do whatever they need to do, right? Because we can't really continue doing quarantines, because that is one part of our economy is really tourism. And for us to restart our tourism, we also have to open up and remove facility-based quarantine. But we do suggest that for everyone coming to the Philippines, they should at least do some form of self-quarantine, just in case they do have the virus and it's not still detectable upon their initial testing. But just like what is happening now in other countries, like in Sweden, in UK, soon in Singapore, in Thailand, they're going to do the same thing. They're going to be removing facility-based isolation or quarantine facilities.
Doc, can you also expand on where the status, what the status is of asymptomatic spread? Because that seems to be the prevalent theory here, that asymptomatics can spread the virus.
Yeah, I'll talk about that.
Sige po.
The first thing is stop using vaccine to differentiate whether a person should go to quarantine or not. The vaccines are obsolete. They were never really done for Omicron, and it's showing to be not very long lasting.
Oops. Doc Iggy. It's the mobile connection. Doc Iggy. Doc Homer, sige. Doc Homer, you want to pick up?
Sorry, I missed the question.
Oh, I was just asking about the asymptomatic spread. The presumption kasi is asymptomatics can spread. Therefore, everyone is suspect until an RT-PCR test proves that they are negative. So
Actually,
is that...
yeah, I mean, for asymptomatic, there's no, there's not, there's, I'd say there's a debate to that, because some people will say they're asymptomatic because they deny they have symptoms, because some of them would have, slight pain in the throat. Some of them would have a bit of cough, a bit of cold. So to them, that's not, they're not infected with COVID. Number two, we also know that in some, in special group of cases, there are those who are infected with the Omicron variant. They might turn up negative on the RT-PCR. So that's why our stand here is you still have to be careful. You need to be tested if you start developing symptoms. As to asymptomatic, I won't say asymptomatic. I would say pre-symptomatic, meaning their symptoms are not yet full blown, but they are already infected. It's just that they're not aware because their immune system or their body is still quite strong. However, the virus is already replicating and might actually be spreading to other people. So that's I think it's pre-symptomatic rather than asymptomatic.
Thank you, Doc. Dean?
Okay, thank you for that insight, Doc Homer. We have last question here from Jim A. Do you also agree with the IATF's decision to place the National Capital Region and other provinces like Batanes, Bulacan, Cavite, Rizal, Southern Leyte, and Basilan back under Alert Level 2?
Mari,
Yes, Francis.
may I answer that question? Dean, again, we are against all forms of lockdowns, whether granular or not. So the virus is all around the Philippines. There is no need to lock down. Now, if a person is sick, I believe, and the doctors will answer this soon. No? If a person is sick, it's his responsibility to stay at home and wait and not go out. So lockdowns, in our opinion, do not work. All forms of lockdowns, whatever levels they are. Doc Iggy, maybe? Or Doc Homer?
Yeah, there's also an abundance of Doc Jody. There's also an abundance
Doc
of
Jody,
studies that show that lockdowns do not work. Doc Jody? All right, maybe there's something wrong with the connection.
Yeah, Dr. Homer.
Doc
I'm
Judy is
sorry.
Yeah,
unmuted. Ayan.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm just putting my input in the chat box. I'm sorry, I cannot help
Okay.
myself. I'm in a public place. I apologize for the rant. Thank you.
Okay, let me read instead what Doc Jody wrote in the chat. She's regarding allowing only vaccinated to go around is promoting transmission because they do not produce IgA, which gives mucosal protection. COVID is a mucosal infection like any flu. The vaccine is only a personal protectant and may give a false sense of security to the vaccinees. Studies show that the viral load of the vaccinated is the same as the unvaccinated or even higher in some studies. The virus, like the big pharma who's laughing on its way to the bank, is also laughing while trying to escape immunity. Thank you, Dr. Jody, because I suddenly sounded much more intelligent than I actually am. Back to you now, Dean.
Right. Okay. Yeah, we have a question here from a media from Albay. The question is it true that vaccinated people are no longer capable of donating blood?
Good question. Doc Jody, Doc Romy, Doc Homer.
May I also
Yes.
ask you, the one who asked the question, if you are in an accident and you need 5 pints of blood, would you want to receive blood from a vaccinated person? That is a serious question. Because if a vaccinated person comes down with COVID infection 1 week after vaccination or even develops the side effects, there's a possibility that you are transmitting that infection to your donee, to the one that you are donating your blood.
Doc, I suspect also this question is a result of the videos that are going around showing much scary looking blood in the supposedly in the vaccinated. Can any of our doctors confirm whether those videos have any scientific value, Doc Homer? Nakamute si Doc. Or any of our doctors? I suspect that's where that question is coming from. Okay. We're not getting any.
You
Doc
can
Homer?
unmute Doc Homer.
Yeah.
Let me see. Baka he has technical, ano. You're
Yeah.
unmuted na po. Ay, wait.
Yeah.
Unmute ulit. Doc Homer.
Nakamute ka, Doc.
So,
Weird. There's something wrong with the connection, maybe. Maybe it's a choppy connection.
Try again. Baka choppy, Mars.
Yeah, it got cut. Okay. Sorry. Who can answer the question? Doc Romy, is Doc Iggy back?
Doc Romy is in.
sorry, bad signal,
Yeah,
but
Doc Homer.
There.
sorry, I missed the question because the signal went bad, so I didn't.
Okay. The question is about vaccinated, the blood of the vaccinated. Is it okay to, essentially, is it okay to use?
Honestly, we don't know. I mean, some people say yes. There are doctors who says no. So, but honestly, we don't know until we get a full data on comparing the blood of the vaccinated and unvaccinated. Until we have that, we cannot say we're for or against. So that's the point here being is, we're not going to say no immediately or yes immediately. We have to still follow the science, still follow data. I think that is what is the most important.
All right. Thank you, Doc Homer. Dean?
All right. I think that's the only questions I have.
All right. Okay. So if that's everything, we can wrap up our press conference for this afternoon. Francis, any last words from you?
Thank you very much for attending this press conference. Again, we have a call to the president. I hope that finally we get to have his ear and listen to us and listen to our recommendations. And wag na po sana tayong wag niyo nang siraan yung mga doktor ng CDC Ph. They have been saving lives and they have saved a lot of lives. So instead, I think you should respect them and give them the due honor that they deserve for saving lives. At yun lang, maraming salamat at God bless as all. Sana magbukas na tayo katulad ng UK na overnight sinabi na lang nila, oh, wala nang masks, wala nang vaccine mandates, wala na lahat. Overnight. And we can do it too. Our country can do it too. All it takes is one person to decide. No? Huwag na nating ipilit yung bakuna. It does not work. Huwag na nating ipilit yung lockdowns. It does not work. Yung forced vaccinations, yung vaccine cards, huwag na tayong mag-discriminate between vaccinated and unvaccinated. Yun lang po. Yun lang po.
Okay, maraming salamat, Francis. Doc Homer, you want to do the closing remarks?
Yeah, so
Tanya,
thank you.
Sasabihin.
Thank you again.
Sorry. Professor Tanya.
Bago si Doc Homer,
Doc,
huli.
One moment, si Professor Tanya na lang muna. Sorry, Doc. Sorry, Prof.
Oh, no problem. Maraming salamat sa lahat ng dumating, lalong-lalo na sa media. Heaven knows that CDC Ph has been trying to get the message out, and we are so glad that you're finally here to hear the other side. Hindi naman namin sinasabi maniwala kayo sa amin, pero sinasabi namin pakinggan nyo man lang kami. At wag din paniniwalaan automatically ang lahat ng sinasabi ng gobyerno, kasi lahat naman tayo tao nagkakamali. So yung request namin sa media, thank you for your time. Thank you for listening to what we have to say. And we encourage you and challenge you to please don't take our word for it. Please do your own research. Everything that we have said here is based on scientific studies, on legal provisions, on jurisprudence. You can fact check us, and we are confident that our facts will hold up. But please do not simply rely on a script that is provided by your principals or your funders, because for all you know, the information that is given to you is actually not facts, but misinformation. Okay, so I trust the CDC Ph doctors. They are well credentialed. You can look them up, look at their CVs. They are people of integrity and they are people of faith. You can trust what we have presented today.
Maraming salamat, Prof. Okay, Doc Homer, kayo na po.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity, for giving us time to listen to our stand. Again, we just want to remind everyone, just to wrap up, that there is an issue with regards to mortality, the number of deaths. And this is not only here in the Philippines, it's actually all over the world. It's consistently been showing that there is an excess mortality problem. Is it due to the vaccines? Is it directly due to the vaccines, indirectly due to the vaccines? As of now, we still don't have the complete data, so we cannot say completely yes or no, but there is an issue, and this has to be addressed, whether we like it or not, whether it's uncomfortable or not. We need to address this. And number two, again, we just want to plead to all the parents. You as a parent, I think everyone here, might be a parent. If you are thinking about vaccinating your child, you have to weigh the risk. What is the risk of dying of your child if they do get COVID? What is the risk of your kids if they do get infected of infecting others? Also very nil. So if you really want to vaccinate your children, you have to understand that the government, that the manufacturers will have no liabilities. You cannot even get insurance because you consented to an experimental vaccine. And if you do, your child gets injured, you will be the one who will be taking care of your child. Just imagine the emotional and psychological burden that would put on you if your child becomes injured because, again, it's experimental. So please do think about it if you really want to vaccinate. We're not against all the vaccinations. We're only against vaccines that have not proven completely safe and, importantly, effective. Thank you.
Maraming salamat, Doc Homer. I'm so glad you stayed with us till the very end despite your very busy schedule. Maraming salamat ulit din sa mga media na nag-attend, sa lahat na nandito. Si kay Dean Bernales, thank you, Dean. And our thanks, of course, once again to Doc Homer, to Sir Nonoy Oplas, Doc Iggy. Sorry, Doc Iggy, we lost you. Sino pa ba? Si Professor Tanya, Sir George, And kay Francis, maraming salamat on behalf of everyone at the Concerned Doctors and Citizens of the Philippines. We'd like to thank you for joining us for this press conference. Mabuhay po kayo at mabuhay po ang Pilipinas. God bless the Philippines. Good afternoon po.